New World, huh? Man, following the development of this game has been what I would call a long and strange journey, filled with ups and downs, numerous changes, controversies. But here we are, almost at the finish line. Most of you probably remember New World's preview event last year. This took place at the end of August on what was supposed to be its second scheduled launch date. They missed that one. Regardless, though, it gave us a little over a week to check out the game, try out its systems, and play through what content was available. And overall, I would say it was decent. Certainly not perfect and lacking in many aspects, but I know myself and many others had a good time playing the game, while we were also aware that there was lots of room for improvement. And of course, being the internet, we were sure to voice our opinions. Well, shortly after that preview event, Amazon posted a blog update thanking everyone who participated and saying they received a high volume of feedback, suggestions, and data that they would use to improve the game. Now, their plan was to focus on adding more mid and end game content, along with some additional features like brand new game modes, landmass, enemy variety, quest variety, weapon types, combat improvements, and interesting non-combat activities, and more. Well, in the subsequent months, they did exactly that. Since last year's preview, there have been fairly large updates to the game just about every single month, with us getting alpha patch notes detailing any changes they made along the way. So now that we're just a few weeks from launch, the launch of New World, what I wanted to do here is give you guys one video recapping all of the major changes and basically new things that have come to the game since the last time many of us played. Now, we do expect a lot of these changes to be available in the closed alpha that's happening over the course of the next couple of weeks. But if you don't get around to checking that out, hopefully this video will give you guys just a nice recap, solid bit of information. So sit back, enjoy the video, watch all my ads. Never mind, you don't have to. Do whatever you want. Let's get into the content. Okay, first let's take a look at the new game modes that have been added. On the PvE front, we saw the addition of expeditions. These are 5-player instance dungeons that are meant to provide difficult group-focused content and give unique resources and loot. Now, if you've ever played an MMO, you pretty much know what to expect. You'll form a group with a tank, healer, and damage dealers, enter the dungeon, fight some trash, solve a few puzzles, and then defeat the bosses for loot. It's pretty straightforward. Now, at the moment, there are 6 expeditions that we know of that have been revealed for the game. Each of these are located in different zones with their own level requirements, unique theming, enemies inside, and of course, the bosses. The dungeons also have their very own loot tables with specific gear for those dungeons. And I think it's worth noting as well that at least for now, every dungeon in New World only has 2 boss fights, which feels kind of small, but it's fine, I guess. I don't know. I did get some hands-on time a couple of months ago with the Amarine excavation dungeon. Overall, I would say that I liked it, although I did wish it was a tad more difficult. Apparently that is something that they've worked on since. And I was also a little disappointed that the bosses were just scaled up or larger versions of some basic enemy types. Although, from what we've seen in their teases of the other dungeons in the game, there are some more unique boss encounters there, so that's pretty good. In general, I would say that I'm really glad they added expeditions to the game. It gives players who like PvE a nice structured activity to do on a regular basis, and hopefully they're going to be having hard mode versions of the dungeons that people can repeat as like a max level end game activity for grinding loot or resources or whatever. Now, the other new game mode that we saw added to the game was on the PvP side of things, and that was Outpost Rush. This is the 20 vs 20 PvPvE battleground where players are fighting for control of these strongholds, and they do so by collecting points, upgrading these outposts, gathering resources, capturing objectives, and of course defeating enemies. So 2 teams will start off spawning at opposite ends of the map, and the very first goal is for them to capture this outpost. These are used as like forward bases and can be upgraded, adding various types of structures that will either aid their team or hinder the enemy. In addition to fighting enemy players though and defending their outposts, there's other ways to collect points. You can build siege equipment, summon in allied PvE creatures, deposit Azoth, or defeat this Baroness Hane, who will also grant your team a strong buff. So you'll collect resources, fight the enemy team, capture these objectives. All of this stuff scores your team points, and the side with the most points at the end wins. You do this for loot and gold and stuff. Outpost Rush is pretty cool. It seems like a nice structured alternative to the open world PvP flagging system or that infrequent, difficult to join 50 versus 50 territory wars in the game. Besides this new mode, there have also been a few other big PvP related additions. They added these faction control points to the open world. These are capturable areas located in every territory's fort. Players can go in, fight to take control of these by having more members of their faction inside. Once you get control, it's going to reward your faction with several buffs. You'll get a 5% increase to experience gain and 20% increase to influence within that territory. On top of that, every fort has a unique buff depending on the zone. So some examples are reduced fast travel cost, increased items gained when gathering, reduced taxes, increased coin and experience rewards. They're really trying to incentivize people to do this open world PvP activity because these bonuses are nice enough that you will want it. We also saw the addition of dueling as a consequence-free way to practice PvP. There's going to be these standard duels of 1v1, but also they have group duels with up to 10 players. I think that's pretty neat. In addition to this stuff, to try to help players in the game care about the territory control and those 50 versus 50 wars, they have also added numerous benefits for all members of the faction that controls a territory. So for one, any two settlements that are controlled by the same faction will now have their storages linked, which will let players of that faction easily transfer items between those two separate locations. They've also added a cart to every town in the game that will provide members of the controlling faction a small amount of resources and refining reagents, a nice additional boost. And these bonuses are in addition to the existing 10% increased gathering and plus 50 luck for the controlling faction. So we've got some new PvE content in expeditions. We've got new PvP content in the Outpost Rush, the faction control points, the dueling, and all of these bonus incentives for territory control. What else? Well, there have been a few new zones added to the game, such as Ebonscale Reach. This is a lush wetlands filled with waterfalls, high mountain peaks, and this Eastern-themed architecture, and is home to the fallen Empress and her corrupted army. This also brings a bunch of new enemy types to the game. This is one of the two brand new endgame zones added. This one meant for players level 51 or higher. And the other zone is Reekwater. This is meant for players level 58 to 60, is located east of Everfall and south of Weaver's Fen, and this is a swampy region with a bayou feel. There's lots of ferns, moss, willowy trees, shallow waters, and mist. The main settlement of this town is called Reekwater Hamlet. It's this like dilapidated fishing village made up of bridges and walkways, all constructed of wooden planks and ropes. Really cool town. This is probably one of my favorite in the game. It's got like this treehouse feel that I really, really like. Now, like I said, with these new zones, we're also getting the addition of new enemy types. So let's talk a little bit about the Pve Enemy Changes. So the new types include things like we've got swamp dryads and fiends. There are undead brutes, creepers, elite world bosses like the Sufferance of Elders and the Protector of the Source. There's the new Corrupted Dynasty enemy faction with things like musketeers, heavies, warriors, spear captains, summoners, and maidens. They've added a new elite enemy system and is intended to make these enemies more challenging and change up their gameplay. So now all named enemies above level 15 will have 1 to 3 affixes applied to them that will change up their attacks and characteristics, making fighting them more interesting but also difficult. This will do things like enhance their offensive or defensive capabilities, but also adding utility things like frost auras, or maybe they explode on death. Again, just in general trying to make it more interesting. We've also seen numerous AI changes. They've added a threat system to the game that didn't previously exist. The enemies will now also differentiate between their light and heavy attacks and adjust how they select their attacks, while also getting these new cooldown abilities, again trying to make the AI more interesting to fight. They've also increased the difficulty of AI when players are fighting enemies above their level, so that's going to just be a little bit harder in general. Another big addition to content variety in the game also comes from all of the brand new weapons that have been added. So we have the Spear, which is a melee weapon that will offer long distance pierce damage and some ranged capabilities. abilities. There's an ice gauntlet, this magic weapon that harnesses the power of ice. This one focuses on damage, area denial, and crowd control. There's the Great Axe, a two-handed melee weapon that excels at large sweeping attacks and locking enemies down. The Rapier is a melee weapon that delivers quick piercing attacks that's capable of debuffing the enemy, doing damage over time, but also making you more difficult to hit. And of course, each of these new weapons come with their own 2 distinct skill trees, which will allow for some customization to fulfill different roles. They also added tower shields to the game. There's no skill trees associated with this, just like other shields, but these are said to be the biggest and most powerful shields in the game. Now, besides the new weapons, we've also seen major updates to every single other weapon in the game. There are way too many changes for me to sit here and read them all off to you, but basically anything you remember from the preview event in terms of the active and passive skills, which weapons were the strongest and for whatever reason, expect that all to be very different. Not one weapon went unchanged. Everything was changed. So next up, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the changes that have been made to the game's combat. One of the biggest updates here has to be the move to independent weapon cooldowns. So weapon skills now have their own cooldowns, letting you use all 3 abilities on one weapon and then swap to another and immediately use those abilities. This is a big change compared to what we saw in the preview event, where if you used an ability on one weapon, its cooldown would lock that respective slot on all of your other weapons. Now, to go along with this though, we also saw them reduce the number of weapons a player can equip from 3 down to 2, while also simultaneously speeding up the weapon swap animations. So we have fewer weapons and as such fewer total skills, but now there's no longer a shared cooldown and we can swap quicker. A few other notable combat-related changes. You can now dodge roll without stamina after being struck multiple times in combat. They made it so that every melee weapon can now backstab. Abilities that are interrupted or canceled before triggering will no longer go on cooldown. They've added light attack chains to the game, so every weapon now has a string of attacks that culminate in an ending attack. Players can now move while using ranged attacks like the bows, and then those attacks can now be fired through non-enemy players, so no more getting body blocked by your allies. They changed the default block angle from 90 degrees to 180 degrees, and they've also done various updates to the game's networking to just improve how combat feels and functions. Next up, let's talk about some of the various changes to loot and gearing in the game. So now the game has a lot more loot, it's all better loot, and it's going to be dropping much more often. They just want to make looting things and finding loot feel better in the game across the board. So some examples of the adjustments here: weapons will now drop with attributes relevant to that weapon, so you're not going to be getting any more fire staffs with strength on them, for example. They've increased the chance of items to drop with gem slots. We're going to see an increase in both rare and epic items dropping. They've also added additional unique named items to expeditions. Large chests in the games are now guaranteed to drop between 2 and 3 pieces of gear. So with all of this new better gear dropping, all equipable items in the game are now either going to be bind on equip or bind on pickup, and they say that this is an important step to make sure they can protect the item economy and keep demand for quality items high. They've also continued to add a lot more visual variety in armor sets. We've seen this in some few videos recently where they're showing all sorts of unique looking gear for players. And in addition to all of this, there have been tons and tons of changes and improvements to crafting in the game. Like the weapon balance changes, far too many for me to go through all of that here. Also, I will say, I really don't care too much about crafting and was kind of falling asleep trying to read through the pages and pages and pages of patch notes of crafting changes. So I just cut it out. There's been improvements to crafting. Crafting's better, I guess. I don't know. Now let's talk about some adjustments to customization. So they did add this new system of attribute threshold bonuses. Basically, these grant a persistent bonus to players for maintaining certain point values in each attribute. Basically, these bonuses are going to be awarded for every 50 points that you've invested into a single attribute, and each of these thresholds will have both a combat a non-combat bonus that gets progressively better the further that you get. What the hell are you talking about, Force? Well, let me give you an example for what the strength bonuses look like. If you have 50 points in strength, you will get a 15% damage increase to melee weapon light attacks and 10% increased mining speed. At 100 strength, you get 20% damage to melee weapon heavy attacks and plus 20 encumbrance. At 150 strength, you get 50% stamina damage from melee weapon light and heavy attacks and minus 10% decrease in weight of mined items. At 200 strength, you get 20% damage on stunned, slowed, or rooted enemies and plus 10% mining speed. At 250 strength, you get a stamina regeneration continuing while you perform your light and heavy attacks with melee weapons and 10% yield increase when mining. And then finally, at 300 strength, light and heavy attacks with melee weapons gain grit, which basically makes you unstoppable. Pretty cool. And you get a 25% chance to fully mine an ore node with a single swing. So as you can see, the more you stack a single attribute, the more you focus on strength, dexterity, intelligence, whatever, the better and better benefits that you get from it. They also made some equipment load changes so that each level of equipment load will have its own unique role and strengths, basically speaking, and then medium and heavy loads will now get a duration bonus for stuns, slows, and roots. Also, on the visual customization front, we've seen a plethora of new character appearance options now available. These include new faces, hairstyles, eye colors, skin features, scars, and tattoo options. Next up, let's talk about some of the questing changes that have been made, various improvements. So for one, all quests in the game have had their dialogue updated to improve NPC characterization in general. This was a problem in the preview event. NPCs were just mostly very generic. And then many zones have also had their quests restructured for a better narrative flow, and they've replaced a lot of the generic looting with new interactable objects. In fact, across the board, they've just increased the variety for both the PvE and PvP quest types. This was a big concern in the preview event. There just wasn't a lot of quest variety. That should be a lot better. And another massive change is they've added voice acting and lip syncing for all of the main story quest lines. I didn't think that was going to happen. I barely remember any NPCs chatting in the entire preview event. So I think that's another pretty cool change. A couple other quick things I wanted to mention as well that have been added to the game. They added fishing as a new leisure activity. Pretty cool. You go out there, you throw out the line, you catch fish. There's fish of different rarities. You'll use them for different recipes, crafting, blah, don't care. There's been a lot of updates as well to the visuals of the settlements. That was another common pain point for players. A lot of the settlements looked identical. In fact, a lot of them were basically identical in layout. So they've mixed things up a bit more, making each of the settlements more unique. They've added discoverable fast travel points besides the ones that were located in the main cities. They are added a new achievement system, and there's been a ton of various UI updates to the game. Specifically, I remember the inventory UI got an update, and I think it looks a lot better now. Now, I will say here, there is a lot more fine granular detail out there besides what I go into detail here, but I think this covers most of the high level changes and adjustments that I assume a lot of you out there probably care about. Like I said at the beginning, we have gotten an update just about every single month since last August preview event. So there are pages and pages and pages of patch notes that you could go through if you felt like reading every single change. This video, though, should cover most of the big stuff that I assume a lot of you care about. Again, except for crafting, I just don't care. And with that, that will do it for this video, checking out all of the major changes, updates, and new things that have come to New World since the last time most of you probably played. I'm very excited for the beta that's going to be running. I mentioned this in another video. I do want to be careful not to burn myself out before the full launch happens, so I'm going to try to really rein in my playtime and not go too crazy over these next couple of weeks. But yeah, we've waited a long time. New World is finally here, and it's pretty exciting. I'm really looking forward to jumping into this game. As I've repeated over and over again, I'm not saying New World is perfect. I'm not saying this thing is going to be a game that I play for several years. No game is that anymore nowadays for me. Just in general, it's going to be a new adventure. I'll get to explore a new world. Explore a new world. That wasn't even intentional. I'll get to explore a new world with my friends, go on some adventures, do some PvP, check out some dungeons, gear up a character, get myself some powerful stuff. I love when new MMOs launch. It's always so much fun, even if the MMO isn't great. I think New World seems okay, but anyway, I can't wait. I'm ready. I'm ready to play New World. So here we go. Thanks for watching my video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll see you in the next one. Take it easy.